All right.
All right.
We have a fantastic guest with us today. It's taken a while to get you here. Salamat. Thank you for coming. Mohamad Ballout from Kitopi. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm really excited to have you here today. I have tons of questions. You're one of the few people that I think, and no offense to a lot of my friends, you're one of the few people that I really, really look up to in terms of what I know of you. We're not friends. I don't know you personally, but I've been following you, your journey. Kitopi just turned 3. Mabruk.
Thank you.
And on that note, I wanted to ask you a few things that I'm sure a lot of people would have loved to ask you. And I just want to start with, you're 3 years into Kitopi. You're super successful. Before that, B&B, also quite successful. And I wanted to ask you, startups, in terms of figuring out what it is you're going to do, is generally a problem that is overlooked. Everyone only finds out about the company that somebody might have started once they've started it, but what happens before that? And I wanted to ask you, how did you and your co-founders first come up with what is the business that you're going to do and the industry and why you decided to get into that business to begin with? So with Kitopi, if you could share.
Yeah, it's a good starting question. And I do think that that's one of the challenges I feel many co-founders don't think through enough, or many founders don't think through enough, which is a problem I'm solving worth solving? And there's a lot of people with great ideas, except they're not really solving problems that's going to change the world and make the world a better place. So I think that's kind of the first one is when we launched Kitopi, the idea started where I sold my last business and I was about to invest in the restaurant space and realized that these restaurants cannot scale up, right? So the revenue contribution from on-demand food was rising and they weren't making any more money. And it's a very operationally complex business that's very hard to scale. Okay. So my view was similar to my last business, which I sold. If you wanted to build a health bar or a chocolate bar or an ethnic sweets range of food items, you weren't going to build a factory. It just didn't make sense. You were going to license out what you want to us and we were going to build it for you. But if you looked at the restaurant space, there was no one taking that problem and solving it for restaurants. And I was like, why can't I build a platform that allows any restaurant to plug into it to scale up? And that's where the problem started, is that they weren't able to scale. So I went to Sam, who is our CTO, and I've been trying to convince him for many years after I sold my first business to join me and do different things. And he kept thinking all my ideas are crap and they're not problems worth solving. Yeah. Except on a trip to the US. We took a trip to the US together and I floated this idea to him. He loved it. And after 20 iterations on what the idea is, we launched it a couple months after that. We actually had a head of operations who was meant to be a third founder. And no one knows this. So this is like just here on this podcast. We actually had a third co-founder who was meant to look at operations, who actually dropped out a week before we launched. Wow. And he actually didn't believe in the idea.
Really?
Yeah. He had a full-time job. He had a fit-out business. And he did not want to quit that job to join us, thinking he doesn't think that what we're doing is going to work. We only knew 1 week before launching. And then what ended up happening was, while I've built a production-led business in my last job, I didn't have enough experience in the kitchen. Sam definitely didn't have any experience in the kitchen. And what ended up happening was I had a friend visiting from Peru with his wife. Yeah. And I just convinced him not to go back. And he had a lot of experience in production. And I just told him, look, I need someone right now. And just don't go back to Peru. Stay here, launch the business with us. And that's what he did. And that's Andy, our third co-founder. Wow. And that's kind of how we launched. Then a couple of months in, Badr, who is our fourth co-founder, joined us. He had a lot of experience founding another startup in the region here, a successful startup. And we need someone to focus on growth, and that's it. So that's how the idea came together, and that's how the founders came together.
But it sort of sounds like So thanks for sharing. But it sounds like what you did is you figured out what you were good at, and then you just scaled it into a different industry, right? Like,
Yeah, I think
it
in
kinda
my
sounds like
particular circumstance, I did have a transferable skill set I was
Yeah.
looking to do, but it didn't start there. I didn't say, "Oh, look, I have this skill
Here's this-
set.
what can I do with
What
this?"
can I do with it?" 'Cause I don't think that's really the right way to do it. It's more about this is a problem. Given my last experience, I quickly
have
understood that this
learning
is
that I
a
can
real problem. I know that I have what it takes to transform this. I needed complementary skill sets from my other partners to make this happen. But I do think that if one needs to think about a problem, like starting up a business, you got to think about, is this problem worth solving? And it brings me back to, I remember when I was angel investing between the time I sold my last company to now, I remember sitting with a founder who was pitching an idea of a cereal business. It's just cereals.
Serious.
And a consumer brand, right? So I was like, okay, so how big is this industry? And it was a few $1 million that he was trying to go after. I was like, so at your best case scenario, in your very niche category of cereals, and you just want to focus on the UAE, you think you can get to a $10 million outcome. I was like, is this really worth your time? Like in your best upside scenario, this is what you're solving. And that's a problem I feel a lot of people are trying to get into and that's something we look at internally at Kitopi. Like if you're trying to take on a problem and trying to build a new idea within, is it a problem worth solving? And if it's not, why are you doing it?
I completely agree, but I think also like coming from the ride-hailing business, having a history in ride-hailing business, the problem that we knew we were solving, we didn't know how big it was gonna get, right? Like if you looked at all the predictions of market sizing that there was when we were in ride-hailing, whether it's regionally or globally, they were like a fraction of what they actually became.
But the problem was always a big one.
But the problem was a huge one.
So it's not about how big is the current addressable market, it's how big is a problem of the entire industry. And that industry is shaping up. I mean, if you looked at online food deliveries 3 years ago, there's nothing of what they are today. But it was a big problem. It was restaurants, right? Absolutely. And it was a sizable enough problem to go after. Today, it happens to be 30 million times larger than what it was, but it was still a big problem.
Absolutely. You touched on it a little bit. You have 3 co-founders that have trusted you, that joined you. I wanted to ask you because I struggle with this problem quite a bit myself, and I always wonder, one, how do you decide whether or not you need or want a co-founder on a personal level, and then a professional level as well? And then once you've decided whether or not you want a co-founder, how do you go about finding them? What is your thinking process? How do you shortlist? What problems should, are they complementary to you? Are they solving a piece of the business, talent-wise, technical skill-wise that you don't have? How do you go about doing that personally?
Look, I do think that the journey of launching a startup or just an idea is typically extremely challenging and could be lonely at times. Right. And having someone to share the journey with is very, very, very important in my mind to actually being able to problem solve. And I do think that a lot of the times I came and thought, this is the answer. One of my co-founders would challenge me on that. And I think the collective thinking is typically something that has worked for us, and both in my first company and in my current business. So I do think that it's something that I would highly encourage anyone to think about. I think there's also a lot of data to show that I think it was like 3 co-founders is actually the right number, but then also 2 and 4 makes sense. Sole founders typically, from a statistic perspective, do not end up having the same success metrics as multiple founders. And the way I would go about it is, I don't think you should be in pursuit of looking for a co-founder. I think that if you want to launch, it's such a challenging journey to launch something. Right? You're going to go through a lot of different emotion. It's going to take a toll on you, on your family, on your emotions, nothing around you. So if you're going to be launching something with someone, you just got to make sure that they are, really someone you can trust fundamentally, because when things look not as promising or you're just having a bad day, you just want to make sure that you have a lot of trust built up. So in my particular example, my first business, it was pretty easy, right? I launched with my brother. and we're like twins.
Yeah.
We have a lot of trust, and that's so we never had to challenge, do we trust one another enough that we can navigate a certain problem. So if we argued about a certain issue, it took us a matter of minutes to forget about the argument and to get through it. So I do think finding someone you can trust that's highly competent. So trust alone is not enough, right? So you can have a best friend who is stupid and you just won't launch a good business. But finding, someone you can trust and complements your skill set and complements your character, I think is where it fits best. And in our particular example, so Sam is, if you think of like from a thinking process, I am very much a executor of today and like this year. Sam is already 3 years ahead. He's much more calm and collected. I'm, pretty, always on fire.
High energy, right?
Exactly. And if you look at Andy and Better, they fall somewhere in between, and that works, right? So we complement our skill sets pretty well. There's a lot of trust. There's a lot of deep trust in how we make decisions, and even when things don't look good, there is trust one another. We can navigate any problem.
But then how do you distinguish between, I want a co-founder to, I think I can hire someone in the market that's super well kind of experienced that can solve the same problem? How do you make the difference between deciding whether they're going to be a partner in it or you're going to hire somebody, right?
It depends on the stage of business. I think in a very, very, very early stage, having a good set of co-founders is very important.
Yeah.
And while you don't want a 10-person co-founder business, but you do need, what worked for us was having a couple, and one where they have enough skin in the game that it was worth them dropping their full-time jobs to do this. And a lot of people would not drop it for an early stage business unless they had enough skin in the game.
Yeah.
So that's on an early stage. On a later stage, Kitopi, while we're very proud to be called founders, this is not a founder-led business. We have phenomenal leaders across the board who lead the business and are far smarter than Sam and I in many ways. And so I think that you could still hire the right people, incentivize them in ways that makes them still feel like this is their business as much as it's our business. And it's not just all about us.
And is that, to get more into the details of that, is that like an ESOP program? Is that comp? Is it
Yeah, I still find it very weird how companies in the region here still don't incentivize their team members or their leaders or across the board well enough. And I think that we're constantly educating new joiners on what ESOPs are, and that's something you would never need to do in the West.
Yeah.
Right, so it's something that we felt that just a few companies over here have done. Kareem have done a great job at doing that, but not that many other startups here have really worked on ESOPs, and I think that that's something that we are really pushing through with across. So we have now 300 members of our team who have ESOPs, and our idea is to keep growing that pool. So I do think that different people are incentivized in different ways, and the more junior roles go, the more education needs to go into why this is so important and why ESOPs are actually what behavior you want to drive in them. But just to take a step back in terms of founder versus hire, I think it's pretty important at the beginning just to make sure whoever is going to drive fundamental decisions and shape up the strategy of where the company is going in that first year, those need to have founder titles. And it's not just about a title. It's more about what kind of caliber of talent you want on board. And top tier talent would not leave a comfortable job if they didn't feel this is theirs. And I don't find any other way to do it except getting them as part of the founding team. So,
I'm trying to draw comparisons across companies that I'm personally aware of, and I completely agree with you. I think the companies that have that sheer perseverance in the early days is a extremely robust and well-experienced, committed founding team, right? It's like the founders are like totally committed, skin in the game through and through, and before they're able to attract all those key hires that you might do across the years, the ones that are super successful are those that are really, really well experienced, really committed to it, and generally are a co-founding team that is at least 2 or more people. Right?
And to add to that, I do think in our particular circumstance, and that's something I would recommend to future founders, is take on as much angel investors as you could that potentially could join you later on. And we have a unique situation where our CFO was our first angel investor in.
Really?
Right. So Sammy joined us. I mean, Sammy's as much of a founder as we are. Right. So he joined us. He was a first check-in, and then 2 years into the business, joined us full time. Mahmoud, who's our chief legal officer, same thing. Angel investor in, 2 years in, joined us heading legal, and both left really big jobs in wherever they worked in to join our journey. And I do think that that's another way to one, have great angel investors advising you, but also potentially bring them aboard if the business actually succeeds.
What do you say to the guy or girl who's thinking about starting a business who doesn't have, because I'm hearing you speak and I'm like, man, this guy has a crazy network. He was able to attract angel investors who have cash, who are well experienced, that can join him. He has a great reputation. So, Mo as a person is fantastically connected, great experience, well respected in the region, and those opportunities are kind of abundant to you in some shape or form because of what you've been able to build. So you built it for yourself. But the person who's here, who's young, who's younger than us, let's say, who's at the beginning of their career, early 20s, who wants to start a company, who doesn't have access to all these people. How do you find the co-founders? How do you find the angel investors? Or is any of that important, right? I'm just trying to, I think about, I started my first company when I was 26, and I knew nothing, but I was in a very different market. I was in North America, everybody was like, wanting to build stuff. The cost to starting was like zero. Everything was way, way simpler to bring stuff to market. I was in retail. I was white labeling products for big supermarkets in Canada and in the US. But starting a business wasn't as daunting as it is here in terms of everything costs money. You want to register a company, costs money. You want to get a license to operate, costs a company. You want a visa, it takes money. You want to attract any talent, it takes money. You want to approach a VC or an angel investor, you need to be in the right kind of clicks. What do you say to the people who don't have kind of the reach that you have or that you've built over time? How do you do that?
Yeah, look, I do think if you have a great idea and you have enough grit, you can make anything happen. And while what I would do, I'm just thinking if I was in that situation, right? So I was in that situation. Like I'm thinking, I was 21 when my brother and I founded our first business, and we didn't have connections, any connections for that matter, and we didn't have money, and we had to hustle.
Yeah.
And the first couple of years were definitely more difficult. I think that what I wish I would have done back then is I wish I would have hired people who knew their stuff, right? Who had connections very fast. I wish we had a third co-founder at that time who had connections everywhere. And that's something I wish we did. And then what we did a few years in is we had a late joiner co-founder who was actually my cousin who later on, expanded our business into new markets, and he had connections and he made things happen super fast. And so what I would say is, like, if you don't have connections, hire someone who does, get a co-founder who does. That's a simple one, and just like hustle. I think that's something you need to do anywhere you are. I actually think it's easier to launch a business here than anywhere else in the world, given the ecosystem is thriving today. There's a lot of early stage capital ready to be deployed. And I do think that compared to 2 years ago or 3 years ago when Kareem didn't exit, people didn't understand that you can actually, this could be a great opportunity for, instead of like joining a boring corporate, you can actually do something much bigger and more impactful. So, and Kareem has definitely paved the way for a lot of us to attract talent in a much more, in a much easier way.
So on that note, I think that's a great segue to the following question. Talent. Notoriously one of the most difficult things to solve in the Middle East, right? Everyone, screams about it. Everyone complains about it. How do you attract talent? How do you kind of convince people to join an organization? How do you find people to begin with? You have a team of 300 people today. You've grown.
We're 1,500, but yeah, 300 have ESOPs.
300 have ESOPs. You have 1,500 people. News to me, Mabruk. That's amazing. How do you today solve the talent question? How do you kind of, because an organization is only as good as its people, and that's your, human capital is your biggest resource. How do you guys mine human capital? How do you find it?
Yeah, look, first, I don't think it's a Middle East problem. I think it's a global challenge to attract the right people. And I think the number one thing I would say that people need to invest a lot in is culture. And if you are a business people want to join, you'll attract the top talent anytime. I actually think it's easier to attract talent here than it is in Silicon Valley or in any hotspot area, just because there's much less good companies going after the same people. If you were in Silicon Valley, and we have a lot of colleagues who are in different parts of the world, and it's fierce. It's like it's just a much fiercer challenge. There's a lot of more competition for the same pool of talent, and it's not the same case here. And I do think that number one, build an amazing culture. People should not feel they're joining you just because you're paying them well.
What does that mean? Sorry.
The people wake up wanting to go to work, not feeling they have to because there's a paycheck coming in. It's as simple as that, right? If you want to say it like you're talking to your 5-year-old kid, it's that simple. You wake up every day wanting to go work there, and the day you don't, you shouldn't go there. And as long as you can create a culture that allows that emotion to continuously exist, then you're doing a good job.
And what's the kind of onus on the CEO in that role? What's your role in building that culture?
Look, I've had to really learn a lot in this business. And I must say, I've not done the same. It was a complete different business last time around versus this time around. Yeah. And I do think this time around, investing early on and getting the right people. I think it's values of a business is not something you just plaster on a wall. Yeah. Right. So we've just went and announced our values again, and we've redone our values one more time. Okay. From the first year to, I think a lot has changed in 3 years, and we just wanted to make sure this is still relevant to what we're looking for in Kitopi. And I do think that I had to develop myself and try to understand that if I can attract the right people, it's not that it's my fault. Like, I need to make sure that the values of what we stand for are actually true. And it's not something we're saying publicly and doesn't exist internally. I also think that being transparent is something super important for businesses. And that's something we've really invested early on, being as transparent as possible in what we're good at and what we're not good at. Yeah. And we run a quarterly survey just to make sure that we just have a quick pulse on how are we doing, how's everyone feeling. Like we launched an overall burnout index just to make sure that as we're scaling super fast, are we burning everyone out on the way or not? And obviously, there were burnouts, and how do you make sure that you're on top of it to avoid it happening again? And so I would say that it's definitely mine and my team's responsibility to make sure that we can really breed a culture that is one that will attract the best talent, and we're not always perfect in doing so.
I have a question I want to ask you. I mean, and I've kind of gotten to this conclusion in the development of DUCKLIFE. We're 2 years old as of this month, and I wanted to ask you because it's something that I'm finding really strange as more and more startups scale, and as I'm in more contact with more startups. A lot of founders, in their super early stage, even pre-launch, will come to us and say, hey, I'm looking for, a CMO, I'm looking for an agency, I'm looking for this, I want to do that, I want to spend this much on my brand, there's a huge investment in marketing and branding, in my opinion, that is extremely premature. And, when it comes to talent, outside of co-founders, where do you make your first investments in talent, in product, in operations, et cetera? What are the first key hires, and where do you think the focus should be in the early days? And when I say early days, I mean 6 months pre-launch and 6 months post-launch. Like, in that first year, what are the key hires and key focuses that you think startups should have? Because I'm dumbfounded by the amount of people that are spending fortunes on marketing, on their brand, on all these things, which is, you know, I'm happy people take it seriously.
Look, I'll give you an example, real life example of what happened with us, right? And so in March of 2020, we understood that there's an opportunity in groceries.
Yeah.
And we wanted to launch our own vertical that does groceries. And we felt there's a lot of synergy from our core business. We had an 80% overlap in SKUs and in number of items that overlapped in starting up a grocery arm. So it was very easy for us to scale it up.
Sure.
We had the infrastructure, the technology to do it. Like, let's just make this happen. Except we didn't have we weren't a consumer brand, right? And our view was like, if we can get enough people to want this product, we'll then build a consumer brand.
Yep.
And if we simply cannot, if there's no demand, why are we going to waste our time? I remember when we launched it, we had 2 bloggers attack us. Right, that's kind of the best word I can use. And they were like, they raised so much money, and they're using some random third-party portal to launch the brand, and they couldn't afford to build their own app. And our view is these guys didn't get it. Like, if we were to go and launch, it took us exactly 10 days to launch this idea and test. And if we were to go spend a lot of money in developing an app, let's just get people to start using it on their mobiles or on a normal desktop. But if we'll build an app, if there's demand for it, right? If there's no demand, why are we building an app? And so we obviously it worked, and it's growing really fast now, and we are now building an app. But the view here is, a lot of people would have just went and said, I want to take 6 months to build the best app, and I want to have the best brand. I want to make sure, and then by then the opportunity is gone, and you don't even know if it's going to work or no. Right? So in our view, we are all about, let's test in the cheapest way possible, build demand, see if there really are assumptions of what customers want, they actually want. And based on that, you can always refine it, make it look better. So this is something that Sam, my co-founder, always says, no one will not want to buy something because of bad user experience on an app or bad user experience on a website. That's not what stops you from ordering. Yeah. If they want to order, they're going to order. Yeah. Except, so figure that piece out at a second stage. First, figure out what the customers want, reiterate, get them what they want, and then refine that experience.
So if I were to drive that down a bit further, so the guys and girls who are starting businesses today that are overly obsessed with building their brand and their marketing engine, all of that stuff to drive traffic and to look nice and sexy, to me, I find that really premature, and the investments are in the wrong place in the early stage. You don't even have a customer, yet you spend a couple 100,000 dirhams on your brand and your marketing. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. You're kind of saying, put it in your talent, put it in your operations, test stuff, have flexibility. Don't necessarily overinvest in brand and marketing in your early days, right? That's kind of, I think, what you're saying. And have the ability to test, have the courage to test without making huge bets first. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, for sure. I would say that it's you can test something super fast, build early traction, and see if it's worth spending more time on, whether it's like a new idea for a new set of founders or an idea within an existing business. I think testing super fast and building some form of MVP before you want to spend money on is the right way to do it. And unfortunately, that's not how people think. People always think, let me build the best and make sure I can spend time running the strategy over the next 3 years and having committees and having, different surveys of people. I think those are just a waste of time. Just test super fast and you'll get results fast, and you can validate things so much faster than any other way.
I remember, it's so funny to hear you say that. I remember specifically this moment. I just visualized it. We were at Kareem. Uber had launched their, what was it called? Where the prices would go up. What was it called? Where they would...
Dynamic pricing?
Yeah, but it was based on, there was a name for it. Anyways, Surging, yes, yeah. Exactly. We didn't have the tech figured out yet, but we had a supply issue because as they would surge, they would get all the supply because they'd make more revenue on that platform, and then the reliability of their platform was better, so even customers preferred their platform because we were not reliable anymore, and our tech wasn't there. we weren't able to go in and surge, and we didn't have that tech there. We didn't figure it out yet. And so we would create these twice a day, in the morning and in the evening when people would commute or whatever. We would like just manually surge. We would look at what our competition was doing and we'd say, okay, they're at 2 point whatever X, we're going to be at 2.1X. They're at 2.5, we're going to be at like 2.4. They're at 1.8, we're going to be at like 1.6. And we would do it manually. And a lot, internally, that was like a huge gamble. And it was, I mean, if you looked at how it impacted our bottom line, if we did it wrong or if we like over or underpriced, et cetera, but had to pay the supplier or the drivers more, et cetera, it was a huge challenge for us. But it reminds me, really, what you just said reminded me a lot of that is, rather than have the perfect product, rather than have something super dynamic, rather than do a perfect product, in order to stay competitive and be able to kind of compete on a day-to-day basis, just go to market with something that at least allows you to try and to test it and see how it impacts your demand and supply, etc. I just remember that story. We were like in a war room, 4 or 5 people around the table. Okay, demand's going up. Okay, supply's going down. Okay, we would do it super manually, and it absolutely reminds me of what you're doing in terms of how you said it. I wanted to ask you another question. You're 3 years into Kitopi. You're basically an entrepreneur for a large part of your career. And learning is something that is never ending, right? I think every day you learn. If I were to ask you today, what has been the most difficult learning in your Kitopi journey? What would you say today?
That's a deep one, man.
It's a deep one.
What's my most difficult learning in my Kitopi journey? Look, I mean, one of the key things that come to mind is this notion of ego. Right, like being, I remember COVID definitely humbled us, and that we were riding high, and then 2 months in, it kind of rattled us. Although we're like 5 times larger as a business than a year ago, I think that it kind of was an eye opener for us in terms of how things can change overnight, super fast. And one thing that's so important for us as a business is remaining humble. Like no matter what, remaining super humble about everything we do. Right? We're always, I mean, one of our values is to listen and learn. Right? So for us, like really being able to know that we're not perfect, know that, we need to be, whether it's one another. I think that, a lot of my colleagues at work, I must say in the first 2 years would probably be fearful to give me feedback, to step up. Although in my mind, I never even knew that, right? That's something I got to learn only in the past year. And it's mainly because I didn't even ask them if they're fearful of me. I couldn't even see that happening, right? So one of the things that I would say I had to learn most, was my biggest learning, is just to be open to listen to everyone and know that I might not have the answer all the time. And we all might not have the answer all the time, and to have everyone speak up. Right. And that's how you really foster the best spirit of innovation, is when you know that anyone can give you any idea. And also to know when you've done something wrong, like, and to know when you should have done something in a better way. So that's kind of one of the big learnings I would say in this business. If you're asking me my last business, I probably never apologized ever to anyone. Right. It was like my way of doing it, and you guys can all listen. And I think I apologize every day to different people. I must have bothered them somehow. I think that one of the key learnings is just to be very humble and to know that you just don't know enough, and to trust. Right, that was one of the biggest challenges I had, is to, if you're gonna hire smart people, they don't want to be told what to do. I read a really good book, and I recommend this to everyone who works with me, and I think everyone should read it in general. So it's called $1 Trillion Coach. And the role of a CEO, or any leader for that matter, is actually not to manage people.
Yeah.
It's to coach people. And it's a very different skill set, to coach versus to manage versus to execute, right? And one of the things I look at doing is just to be the best coach, right? I want the best basketball players on my team, and I'm not going to teach them how to shoot the ball. They all know how to shoot. I just want to make sure they can work well together. And as long as I can just do that, I've succeeded, because I have the best players, right?
I think it's super interesting. I have I'm lucky enough to have a mentor that I've had for a really, really long time. And a couple of weeks ago, he said something to me that completely slapped me silly. It completely woke me up to kind of what you said. He said, I have a bunch of companies that I'm running, and I was explaining to him the challenge that I have, that I'm spread too thin, that I'm exhausted, that I'm not finding enough hours in the day, that I don't have enough energy. And he said something, and he must have said it before, but the way he said it this time changed everything. He said, if any of these companies, any of your teams need you, then you basically haven't built anything. And I don't know why that really shook me, but it made me realize exactly what you just said, that it's about coaching. And that he said, if you drop dead tomorrow, or if you decide to take a 1 month vacation and leave, what happens to your business? Can it run without you? And if it can't run without you, then you need to ask yourself, have you actually created any value? Have you actually built anything that can sustain? Because if the answer is no, then you actually haven't built anything. You just found a way to scale your own energy.
Look, I hear what you're saying. I do think it depends on at what stage of the business cycle
100%.
you're in. In the first 2 years, 3 years, I think if you leave and nothing happens, I don't know what impact, as a founder you've had on the business to begin with, right? Like first 3 years, the business needs you because unless you've over-resourced yourself, it needs you because you're probably doing 20 jobs, right? Like but at a certain stage of business, I do think that, one needs to move away from managing and executing to coaching. And I think that's one of the key things I've learned is how not to take on, how to really make sure you have the best players on your team. It's as simple as that. And anyone who's not a best player, let them go. You need the best players, right? Like I think that you can't build something so meaningful with B players. Like, I can't imagine, the LA Lakers can win the playoff with like big great players. Like they just simply can't. They just need the best players to win, and that's what we look for.
To kind of close the conversation, I wanted to ask you about how the Kitopi journey has kind of changed. When you guys started 3 years ago, you were, pretty much alone. You were operating kind of independently. You had a little bit of competition here and there, but today, I don't think there's a week that goes by that you don't hear of another cloud or dark or hybrid or that model, right? I think anybody who's anybody in the food business now thinks they can do what you guys do or a version of what you guys do. And when I draw parallels to kind of my career, every time there was a bit of competition, we had mixed feelings. Oh, it's great for the industry. It's going to educate people. It's going to get people excited, whether it's investors or consumers or whatever. But it's also like, oh, damn, now we have to, change our game. We have to be more robust. They're going to take our talent. How do you guys kind of deal with competition?
Yeah, look, it's, I think that our view is one, great for the ecosystem in general, great for consumers to have more selection. Sure. I think that there's different people trying different versions of a cloud kitchen. There's people building the real estate component, which is building kitchens, leasing them out to third party. We don't do that. So a very different business model. It's like comparing Kareem to the actual car companies, right? Like It's very different business. So second layer is people building brands. We think that's a great thing. We think that eventually, there's going to be a lot of it's going to be commoditized. If you guys do a quick sense check and ask 10 people around you, where do you order food from? 5 years ago, you used to actually name the restaurant. Today, you don't even name the restaurant. You say, I order from the aggregator's name, right? Yeah. So you've moved away from naming a restaurant. And if you take a step forward and ask them, okay, what in that aggregator do you actually order? Which restaurant on the aggregator? They'll then tell you sushi or pizza. And so it's starting to happen. So people building delivery-only brands need to really understand that unless they build brands with amazing brand equity, they're going to be diluted super fast. And so our view is, how do we be a platform that allows the top brands to scale up and grow? And in that space, there's not that many playing in it. And it's just much more complex to do. But that said, there are new entrants in it. And I think that our view is, look, we have lost people to competition. That is something that's part of the nature of the job. We just need to make sure that we're completely on top of our game to make sure people want to be with us because they're seeing value, and if they don't see value, they should leave, right? They should see constant value in where we are. I also think that, my advice to founders is raise as much money. If you see competition shooting up, first, focus on your product. Make sure you have something far superior to anyone else. So focus internally, build an amazing product, figure out what your customer wants, and really double down there and raise a lot of money, because I do think certain investors, especially in this part of the world, won't invest in competition. So the more you raise outside, the more you raise, typically that money won't go to competition. But I would say that that's not the kind of number one view. Number one view is like focus pretty much in understanding what your customer wants. We at Kitopi, while we are aware of what competition is doing, there's zero focus, zero time put in to really
measure yourself up against them.
Just because for our views, like, why would we do that? Like, it is not a winner takes all market. Let's build something super meaningful. And yes, there will always be people trying to copy what we do, but it doesn't matter, right? Like, our view is we're going to be 20 steps ahead all the time just because of our focus is going in the right direction. So I would say that, really focus on what the customers want.
Sure.
is the right way to look at it.
Cool. And then I'm really curious about this. I don't know if you have an answer, but every organization I've been a part of, either my own or some that I joined, there was always a very clear vision of what the end game was. And it would often shift. Like, these 2 years, we're going to go public. And then, 3 years later, it's like, we're going to sell. Or no, actually, this is a great business. We're going to keep it and we're just going to live off of it. How important is it, and what would you say to people that are starting companies? How important is it to have a view of that?
So that's not a vision, right? To me, our mission statement or vision as a business has nothing to do with, are we going to sell, go public? For me, that's just a component of, do you need more capital? That's maybe, is this an efficient way to raise capital? But it should support your mission statement.
Sure.
So if your question is it important to think through different liquidity events for some shareholders? I can answer that. Or is your question?
My question is, a lot of founders or a lot of startuppers tend to want to think about what the end game or what the objective at the end of the road will be for them independently. And I think those are questions that are completely irrelevant. And that's what I'm trying to get to.
I think if any founder is building a business to sell it, that's the worst reason to build a company.
Yeah.
It's just such a horrible idea. Someone's just getting married just because they want babies, or they're just like, to me, there's like some, so I just in general, I find it just a weird way of you building a company to sell it. And just to make money. I think that's the wrong reasons to build a company. We're not doing that for sure. We're building something because we believe in its mission and what we're trying to achieve. Will there be some shareholders who expect, like any other, and some investors will expect some form of liquidity along the way? Probably yes. We're very fortunate that our major shareholders are all in this for a long run, so there's no imminent need of liquidity, so they're all in it for next decade or so.
Sure.
And that's when we're building it for the long run. I think that never build to sell is key, and never hire people who are coming in because they think they're going to flip their shares in a couple of years. Build it. Amazon, look at the top companies in the world, like the largest business in the world. They've all existed for decades, right? So if you want to build something super meaningful, build it to last.
But at some point they went public. At some point they,
But that was just a way to raise capital. Yeah. We might go public very soon, and that will not change anything. I mean, for us, it's just another way of raising capital. It's not we don't have a objective going public. I mean, it's not an ego boosting event, right?
When you started, that's not part of the conversation. Yeah. So completely ignore that.
Look, I think that, again, you should, is the problem worth solving? And if yes, build a company that allows you to solve that problem, which the vision will probably shift over time. We just changed the mission statement 3 years into the business, thinking, wow, it's just so much bigger as a business.
I don't disagree with you. I think the only thing I'm trying to say is the Kareem story is a beautiful one. But it ended with a $3.1 billion price tag, and everyone is raving about it.
But I disagree with that. I disagree with that. And if Mudassir was sitting here, he would actually not say that. He would say it didn't end. Mudassir is still the CEO, running it independently, with an inspiring story behind it, and it's still growing. And it just happens to have been acquired by Uber, and it's now part of something bigger, but it's still going on. And I think that it'll be a pity if Uber went and shut it down, and then that would have ended. But I don't think that's what's happening. I don't think that's the objective there. In our particular example, we're not interested to engage in a discussion of being sold to someone or being,
I think fundamentally that's what I'm trying to say, Mo. I'm trying to say that my fear is that exit, let's call it as an exit, has sparked a gold rush in people's minds, whether it's the VC community that are now promising, that the stars will align again, or entrepreneurs that have seen that and said, hey, you know what?
I can do that too.
I can do that too. And what I hate about that, and what I'm trying to say is, what scares me is that people are focusing a lot on that and not the first part of solving the problem that has any importance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm just really afraid of that being a narrative that's, because I've heard VCs going to LPs saying, hey, look what just happened. We're getting great exits in the region now. That's what it's all about. And now they're setting that narrative.
But you do need that, right? I do think if you are an investor in a VC, your goal is to make money. It's a financial transaction. You invest in the VC because you want to make
Give me money
an
because
upside.
I'm going to make you money. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do think that investors need to make money on their money.
Yeah.
And but that should not impact the company's vision and mission. So
hopefully it doesn't trickle down to the companies that.
But even if I do think that at a certain point, let's assume we're 8 years, 10 years into our life as a business, we'll probably need to help our investors find a way to liquidate their position, right, at Kitopi. So to exit. So does that mean we go public? Probably one way, or find another set of investors who are going to buy their shares and continue the journey for the next decade or so. So I do think that it's just an evolution. I think investors need to say that to raise more capital. They need to show success stories. If you can imagine, if there are no exits, then how can they raise more money? Like, who's gonna wait on their investment for like 50 years, right? So there need to be some exits. But I think from an entrepreneur founder perspective, I think what you're trying to get to is, don't build it because there's an exit in 4 years. Build a company to last a lifetime. I remember I was sitting with another founder of another business, and he's like, this is a financial transaction to me. I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, no, my company, so he's talking about his own business, is a financial transaction. I plan to build it and in a couple of years to sell it. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my God, like, how do you attract talent? Like, how do you wake up every morning thinking the only reason you do this is because you plan to flip it in a couple of years? And it's just such a low sense of purpose of why you do things and build things. And I would, and that's not how we think. And that's not what I recommend people to think, to build a business that the intention is to sell.
Fantastic. And final question. Kitopi. The region has been kind of very good at building regional brands, right? Brands that operate in the region, that grow and scale in the region. And your focus seems to be having, kind of a cross-ocean presence. I wanted to ask you, is the vision of the brand to be a regional brand, or is the vision of the brand to be a global brand?
Look, the problem we're solving is a global problem and we think that we're in a position to solve this across different parts of the world. We obviously are starting with the region, but the normal thing to do, which we've announced recently, is to also keep crossing different geographies and doing this in different markets. So we're going to be in Asia, Southeast Asia next, and our goal is to keep doing this in different parts of the world. And I think that that's something that regional entrepreneurs should definitely think, like to while the region here is massive and there's a lot of opportunity to solve problems for the region, I think we need to innovate a lot more and not just take ideas that exist in one part of the world and replicate them here. I mean, that's not wrong, but I do think that there's so much more we can do to make this region actually one which innovates across the world.
Thanks, Mo. I really appreciate you having me here.
Thanks, man.
I think the conversation was super insightful. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And hopefully we'll talk in a couple of years again.
Thanks for hosting me.
Thank you.